What a strange place. It's all so full of weirdies and werewolves.
On this day, be ye with your descendants cursed until eternity!
Terrible line, darling. Great alliteration, but terrible line.
This is the first film to be directed by the British director Michael Reeves. In the UK it was titled Revenge of the Blood Beast, but it's probably better known for its American title, She-Beast.
I knew he raised the money because he'd already done a second unit job on a movie called Castle of the Living Dead with a young Donald Sutherland, and had rather impressed a producer called Paul Maslansky. And Maslansky said, look, I've got a little bit of money together, maybe we can scrape together a little script and we can do something. So he got the money really through Paul Maslansky, who was a terrifically good guy who liked producing low-budget movies.
Set in 1960s Romania, but actually shot in Italy, the film sees two newlyweds, played by Ian Ogilvy and Barbara Steele, exploring Eastern Europe, whereupon Veronica, the wife, gets disappeared and replaced by a witch who was executed years beforehand.
Now, one of the things I find really interesting about The She-Beast is that it's not a serious movie in the way that The Sorcerers and Matthew Hopkins' Witchfinder General are.
Kim Newman is quite correct. The tone of this film is inconsistent, at times feeling like a hammer horror, at other times feeling like a farcical comedy. This car chase sequence, which happens in the last act of the film, is covered by a series of wide shots which have been undercranked in order to speed up the motion, but it gives the scene this Benny Hill feeling. It would be remiss to blame the credited director, Michael Reeves, for being solely responsible for this, as the actor, Mel Wells, who has a significant role in the movie, was directed in second unit, and the production didn't have the money to reshoot, and the running time was too short to discard.
But I do think that was a mistake, and I think the film would have been better without those little comedy moments in it. Really. Though
there are elements of humour which came directly from Reeves himself, like this moment where the witch throws a sickle from her hand. That blade was thrown by the off-screen director himself and is clearly a reference to Romania stepping away from its ties to the Soviet Union, which had only happened a year or so before this production was filmed.
If a line was really awful, I could say to Mike, I hate saying this, could I do this? And he usually would say yes. Mike trusted actors mostly. He liked actors, and he said, I don't know what you do. I don't know how you do what you do. I have no idea. He said, I'm really not going to tell you what to do or how to do it, because I'm going to leave that to you. He's the only thing I'll ever say is, could you do it quicker or slower? Or could you run less like a pregnant penguin? Could you just do that? But he never really sat you down and talked about motivation, because he didn't understand any of that. He had no interest in doing that. He said, if I cast the actor right, the actor will do it, and that's his job. I'm doing my job over here, he's doing his job over there. So there was no conference of sitting around discussing character or anything like that.
This was Ian Ogilvy's first movie role, having only been in a few television productions before this. He secured the part due to his friendship with the director, for whom he had acted in a couple of amateur films during their school years. But he was called up, out of the blue, and cast in this film without audition.
But I personally find it slightly embarrassing. I was terribly bad in it. I was awful in it, I thought. And I can't watch myself in it now. But it was a first film. One has to be excused, I guess, for all that.
Ogilvy is being harsh on himself. He's perfectly fine in a role in which the writing doesn't give a great deal of depth to in the first place. But it's Barbara Steele who's the real star of the film, as she had already made a name for herself starring in Roger Corman's Pit and the Pendulum and Fellini's 8½, which in my opinion is one of the most overrated films of all time. But she was given £1,000 for 1 day's worth of filming, which is about £15,000 adjusted for inflation. And then she was worked for 22 hours solid.
On Barbara's day, you had hundreds of setups because we were
She worked 1 day.
She was just too expensive. That was the trouble with you, Barbara. You cost too much money, so therefore...
Did I work 1 day?
You did one day.
1 day's
It was
work.
his trick.
Yeah, why don't
he
you
said,
tell...
you only have 1 day on the movie, but many hours did you work?
22.
There you go.
Yeah. I remembered 18, but I'm glad you said 22. It makes a better story.
It does.
And your agent was David Niven Jr. Do you remember?
That's right, David Niven Jr.
And he never
No, I
told
didn't
you,
remember.
but he never told you about this particular engagement until the night before. And I remember that.
It's hardly surprising you don't remember it. You had one day on the film, and you were told about it the night before. How
But I remember, didn't we have a huge fight, Paul?
Yes, we didn't speak for 10 years.
I know, but what was it about? What
About
was it?
this,
About
about
making
working
you
you.
work for 22
About working you for your now 22 hours.
For
But I
$1,000.
thought I split in the middle of it in my costume or something and left my costume behind.
Maybe took my hat. I
See, the
think
thing
you
is, you're at
probably
the
did.
beginning of the film, and you're at the very end of the film. So, and yet you're the star.
Barbara Steele is excellent. And when you consider that everything she does in the film, which is a fair amount of dialogue over several different locations with several costume changes, was filmed in the span of one day, it's all the more impressive.
And the final, smiling, possessed look to camera thing, which was in pretty much every horror film of the later 60s and 70s. Okay, it's in The Haunted Palace first, but it was something that Barbara Steele's smile at the end of She Beast is echoed over and over and over again in subsequent horror movies. I think that was almost the reason, that smile is the reason why it was worth getting Barbara Steele for this. Obviously, there was a marquee value of having her in it that at that time Ian Ogilvy, was not capable of delivering.
I find it very interesting that in this great period of phenomenal optimism in Italy that these horror movies came out. Because the dark side is always going to express itself somewhere.
She Beast is something of a mess, but an enjoyable one. The director shows a considerable amount of skill, particularly in those scenes involving the witch, but because of the tonal whiplash caused by the comedic set pieces, it leaves the viewer unsure exactly what they're watching. Michael Reeves would direct 2 more films, The Sorcerers starring Boris Karloff and The Witchfinder General starring Vincent Price, neither of which have any comedic relief in at all, but both held in higher critical regard than this movie.
On this day, be ye with your descendants cursed until eternity!
I'm not sure if this film is officially in the public domain or the rights holders just don't care about it, but it exists in many different versions, of varying quality. The best version I have found is the 2024 UK Blu-ray release, which has a beautifully crisp image. Michael Reeves could have gone on to be every bit as revered as Ridley Scott is now, were it not for his untimely passing at the age of 25. His masterpiece is Witchfinder General, but this is the film I think of when I hear his name. Maybe because it was the first one I saw, or maybe it's because of the invention, the ghoul, the chutzpah behind its production that attracts me. Either way, it's a notable film in the annals of British horror, but one that is often overlooked. I'm Scott Kingsnorth, and I'm making a movie.